up, Buckeye fans? It's Patrick Murphy from Bucknuts and 24/7 Sports coming to you from the NFL Combine. We've been here all week. It came out on Tuesday. I'm recording this on Thursday late afternoon. From most people's perspective, the Combine really kicks off today, Thursday, with the on-field workouts. We've been in interviews the last 2 days, but I think as we're recording this, the defensive tackles are going through drills. It's been a fun week. We are going to be here for one more day on Friday with another group of interviews with wide receivers, running backs. Quarterbacks will also go too, but obviously Ohio State does not have a quarterback here. So it's been a good week so far, and I wanted to just kind of get into what we've storylines and what we've heard and seen from the NFL Combine. This won't be a long show because there's a lot going on here, but I wanted to get a show out as I did not have one last week as I was out of town. So before we get going, as always, please, if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you hit that thumbs up button, turn on the bell for notifications. It doesn't just get you these podcasts, these videos, but all of our video interviews. And we've had plenty this week. All of the Buckeyes that have spoken are on there if you want to go listen. A lot of good stuff, and I'll get into some of it here as we go through this. But go on there and make sure you get all those videos because spring practice is right around the corner, and we will have plenty of stuff going up. And then if you're listening to this on your podcast platform of choice, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review and comment. Let's get into the Combine. So in case you haven't been paying attention, 11 former Ohio State players were invited to the Combine. That list includes Davison Igbinosun, Lorenzo Styles, Caleb Downs, Arvell Reese, Sonny Styles, Caden Curry, Caden McDonald, CJ Donaldson, Carnell Tate, Max Clare, and Will Kazmarek. We have spoken with each of those guys except Carnell Tate and CJ Donaldson, who will both speak on Friday when to wrap up the second to last day of interviews, I guess, technically, because the offensive linemen are the last day. Also, John Froman, the long snapper, was here. We ran into his family the other night. Very nice people, but I wanted to acknowledge that, even though the long snappers weren't listed on the invite list for some strange reason. Long snappers are people too, but I guess not in the eyes of the NFL when it comes to the Combine. So the first thing is, I think, at least in terms of my takeaways with Ohio State, is it's just funny that, last year, I think it was 15 Buckeyes that were invited to the NFL Combine, and that was coming off a national championship year, right? And just this absurd season that the Buckeyes had, and kind of everyone coming back, and you knew it was going to be a huge class. And then you lose so many of those guys. 15 guys invited to the Combine, I think 14 drafted, other guys signing undrafted free agent contracts. This year, you still have 11 guys that went to the Combine. Now, a large group, as I listed there, were on defense, but it just goes to show the power, I guess, for lack of a better term, of Ohio State football and what the Buckeyes offer to NFL teams. And this is nothing new, but it's just a reminder every year that, even down years, and last year certainly wasn't a down year, but you just had to replace a ton of starters. You still have this many guys that are of enough interest to the NFL that they were invited to the Combine. And I think you could, you look at projections for some guys, and there's going to be a couple of these guys that are either late round picks or go undrafted. And I think you can make the argument that maybe there should have been at least one more. Tywan Malone was one that I was surprised did not make the cut for this event because I thought he had a really good season, and I thought he could have helped himself the Combine. So I think it's just a reminder that even in a year when Ohio State doesn't win a national championship, doesn't have all this talent, returning experience and whatnot, you still have so many guys that the NFL would love to have on their team. And then you start at the top of the draft, and I think it's going to be a really interesting battle to see which Buckeye comes off the board first. I know most mock drafts have Arvell Reese going as high as number 2 overall. And I think that's probably where it's going to go. The New York Jets there, they certainly need all the help they can get. But I do wonder if a guy like Sonny Styles could creep up there. They haven't done their on-field activities yet. You just look at the measurements today. Styles is the bigger linebacker. He has more film. And I think he's certainly going to impress teams in interviews with the way he communicates and the way he talks. And that's not to take anything away from Arvell Reese, but I do think that Sonny has maybe more upside than people are realizing. Let's remember, he's only been a linebacker for 2 years. And before that, he was obviously playing safety. So the physical traits alone, I think, are going to really impress some people. Expect, and we'll see it here in a little bit. I assume most people will know the answer by the time this comes out. But just what he does in these workouts, I imagine, is going to be pretty impressive. And not to take anything away from Arvell Reese, because he too, I imagine, will wow some people. But Sonny's bigger, heavier, not by a ton, but every inch counts in the NFL, right? And Sonny was a guy who, yes, he only has played linebacker for 2 years, but he essentially was a 3-year, I don't know if you want to call it a 3-year starter. He was that nickel that rotated with Jordan Hancock during his sophomore season. So he didn't start every game, and then obviously moves back to safety after Lathan Ransom gets hurt. So some versatility there. Also remember, going back to his recruitment, Sonny reclassified. And so he's a young player. And NFL teams, if you're looking for kind of how long can this guy play type of thing, are you going to take a younger guy? I think that is at least a small part of the equation. And Arvell, also younger, only played 3 seasons, but he doesn't have that 4th season of tape and experience and all that stuff. Sonny was a starter on the national championship team. And I think the versatility that Arvell has shown coming off the edge and stuff, Sonny can do that. And he talked about, he wasn't asked to do a ton of that last year at Ohio State, but he certainly can. Now, he doesn't have the edge rusher experience that Arvell has, but I think that's an interesting, sort of battle to watch between 2 now former teammates. And then obviously Caleb Downs in that conversation too, as an early pick. I think there have been, I know there have been at least one that I've seen kind of talks about if he really is as good as advertised, which I think is silly. Look, I can't predict what Caleb's NFL career is going to be, because I do think there are some things that you can ask about his size. Is he the ideal size for a safety and things like that? But I think as soon as you sit down and watch Caleb's film, listen to him sort of break down the game and get an idea of his football IQ and understanding, you quickly see why he was such a highly recruited prospect. Nick Saban wanted him. Ohio State wanted him. Why every program wanted him. And then when he enters the transfer portal, same thing. Ohio State and Georgia were the 2 teams, two really good programs, right? So I think the ability, the mentality, the versatility of Caleb Downs is going to be something that teams love. Teams already love. Is he going to blow people out of the water with his testing? No, I think he's a good athlete. He's not a great athlete. But when he gets in meetings with teams, he's already been in some, when he's able to break down film, and even when they're not talking football, I think he's a guy who's got a lot of interest, and he's really going to impress these teams enough to jump way up. From I think most consensus is probably around 7 to 10 for Caleb, and I think that's more to do with the safety position. But I think he's has the possibility to drop up even higher and be he's going to be a game changer for the defense in my mind. I don't understand the talk about maybe he can't be as good at the next level, and maybe I'm biased having watched him so closely for the last 2 years. I think there's a reason why some top defensive minds have been really enamored by Caleb. In terms of some of the discussion here, I've been really impressed with these Ohio State players. Sometimes you listen to guys and at the combine, and obviously if you are unfamiliar with how this works, they do interviews with teams, but they also do media here, and they have big stages set up and people fill around. I think that the Ohio State players have all come across really well. Again, you can watch those videos on our YouTube page, but it's clear a lot of these guys were great interviews anyway, right? And were prepared for being in front of a large media group. But you see other people, other players at the combine that maybe this is the first time they've done that, and as much media training as you can get. think is still not enough when all of a sudden there's 20, 30 media people around and everyone's trying to fire questions at you. Even, Caleb Downs, when he got up there, like 4 or 5, it was a huge group, but 4 or 5 people were trying to ask questions at once. And he was like, sheesh. So it's a lot to deal with, but I think they've all handled it really well, which is to be expected. But even, a guy like Arvell Reese, who hasn't always, seemed to love doing media, I think really seemed to, have worked on his answers to things and, sort of gone through some media training to be ready for this because, yeah, the interviews with teams matter and things like that, and certainly matter more, and the workouts matter. But I think there is, just that perception. You're in front of cameras and whatnot, right? So I think that will play its part in terms of what every little bit helps. So if you seem prepared for all the interviews, for the workouts, for everything, I think that only helps when it comes down to fine margins and things like that. Some guys that are some things that we've heard. I think Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles, I mentioned them earlier, but the versatility of guys like that. I think Caden Curry is another guy who's really interesting when it comes to the where he is. A bit on the shorter side, arm length wise. Traditionally, we'll see what he exactly measures at, but can he kind of overcome that this week? I think is something we'll be watching. I think it's always interesting coming out of the combine where the draft prognostications, the projections for guys, where that changes, who impressed enough to move up, who maybe didn't, who hurt themselves, like those type of things. And I think Ohio State's always handled that really well. And, Caden's a guy I think that can help himself. Caden McDonald as well. He's a guy who's projected as probably a later first round pick, but can he move himself up with some good workouts here at the combine and make himself some money by becoming a higher draft pick. And another storyline that's emerged from here and kind of ties together with what I'm saying is Matt Patricia. He not only helped a lot of these guys last season with what he did coordinating Ohio State's defense, but he's met with these guys, done Zoom calls with these guys to prepare them for what they're about to go through at the NFL Combine. And there are all sorts of things that these guys do, so this isn't anything new. But Matt Patricia's been the guy on the other side doing some of these interviews. He's been through this combine process for years and years and years. And so I think this is a huge advantage for these Buckeyes and next year's Buckeyes and however long Matt Patricia remains at Ohio State. And maybe even if he moves on, he'd still help with this to some degree, depending on his availability. But the fact that you can have a guy who's been a coach in the NFL, not only with the New England Patriots as the defensive coordinator, but also a head coach with the Detroit Lions. He's been in these rooms. He knows what teams are going to ask. Lorenzo Styles was asked about this and just because a lot of guys have brought up Matt Patricia and the way he's helped them prepare for what they're going to face here at the Combine. And he brought up that, everything that he's told them in terms of what guys will ask, like he's knocked that out of the park. The videos that Matt Patricia showed Lorenzo, like this is the film that they're going to look at. These are the things that they're going to ask you about. He said he's been spot on with all of that. So you almost have the answers to the test before you take the test. You still have to go out and do it. You have to go in those meeting rooms and break down that film and have responses and show what you did well and where you can improve and things like that. And Sonny Styles was talking about that as well. Like areas he can improve. He knows and he wants teams to know that he recognizes these and he works on these and it's a continuous evolution for him. Not only a linebacker for the last 2 years, as I said, but I think all of these guys have really benefited from having Matt Patricia and that expertise. Not to say that Ohio State guys in the past haven't done well at the Combine. I think they have, and Matt Patricia's not the only guy. Ryan Day did this, right, when he was offensive coordinator for the Eagles and the 49ers. And there have been other guys. Brian Hartline went through this. Tim Walton went through this. James Ornice went through this as a player. But Matt Patricia just has that different experience. He's he's been the head coach, as I said, that's running these things, and he knows what teams are looking for, especially on the defensive side of the ball, but the offensive side of the ball as well. And so I think that's been a huge benefit to a lot of these guys. And then sort of in conjunction with that, the decision, which, the official news came out this week. We'd reported on it over at Bucknuts a couple weeks ago, or a week or so ago. But Matt Patricia coming back and what an impact that can have on the defense. And I've asked some guys about that. And you're losing 8 starters again. And so who it was, one of the guys talked to us about, this is I think it might have been Lorenzo Styles again. He was just one of the guys today, so he's been on my mind. But the ability to build the defense around the personnel he has, right? And you saw it last year using Arvell, using Sonny, Caden McDonald, maximizing the talent of the guys that they have on defense. Next year's going to look really different, right, in terms of that personnel. And Lorenzo said the defense may be very different because of that. That it may not look like the 2025 defense, and that doesn't mean it won't be good. I think it's hard to be as good as a historically, one of the best defenses in college football history. But I think that the ability that Matt Patricia has, and we talked about this last year, to work with what he's got and maximize that talent, like that's going to be huge. And a lot of these guys have brought this up. And, obviously, you build on the success of a year ago, especially with some of the guys coming back. So I think, it was really good timing that Matt Patricia, that news kind of came out, and that he had, he posted on his Instagram, making it official. So it was really good timing because we were able to ask about this coming back. And I think guys are excited to see what that next evolution of Matt Patricia's defense at Ohio State looks like. I'm excited to see it. I imagine a lot of you guys are excited to see it. Obviously that's not an NFL Combine story, but it's come out of there with guys talking about what's coming next. And speaking of, a lot of guys get asked about sort of the next guys up, right? Who's coming, in their position group or on their side of the ball. Some names that have come up, and some of these won't really surprise you, but in the linebacking room, a guy like Peyton Pierce, we've heard his name brought up a lot. I think that he kind of has followed the Arvell Reese path, right? He was the backup third linebacker this past season, got good playing time. Now he has the opportunity to step in and be a starter. No guarantees there. Obviously, Ohio State went out and got another linebacker in Christian Allegro. You have other guys. Riley Pettijohn is another guy whose name has been mentioned. But if Ohio State can continue to have that third linebacker become, flash one year and then become a star at the position next year, that's a really good way to kind of progress along. And it sounds like from talking to these guys, especially the linebackers, that, and Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles, like both mentioned Peyton Pierce as a guy, in talking to a number of the guys on defense. Jalen McClain and, Caleb Downs talked about he's just as good as Caleb, but he was just kind of overshadowed by Caleb this past season. That's a high bar. That's high expectations to put on anyone. So I'll be looking to see if he can play at that level. Jalen McClain had a really good first year as a starter, and I'll be really interested to see how he can build on that next year. Can he be Caleb Downs good? I mean, that would be huge for this defense, right? You're losing a key piece, but he did get to play with Caleb. He did get to experience it, what it's like, and how Caleb goes about his business, watching film with him, all that stuff. I don't think Caleb is just going to say that. He could say that, Jalen McClain's going to be really good. So I do think that, that's something when Caleb said something like that, like my antenna pops up a little bit, perks up a little bit. And I think it's something to watch throughout this offseason, how Jalen's game is evolving. There. On the defensive line, obviously there will be some new faces in terms of the transfers that Ohio State brought in, but Aiden Curry couldn't stop talking about, his classmate in Kenyatta Jackson and the good things that he thinks he will be able to do. The word I've used with Kenyatta is he was kind of unleashed towards the second half of the year, able to rush the passer more and not just use to contain the quarterback. And I think that we'll see more of that in 2026. Hopefully for his sake, he's not held as much as he was at the end of the year, but Caden Curry, really high praise for Kenyatta, who he said, could be here at the NFL Combine if he had decided to come out early, but he decided to stay and, go through another year and sort of be the guy on the defensive line. And they're going to need him to be that guy because there's just not a ton of experience coming back, right, across the entire defensive line. It's really him, Edric Houston, and Will Smith, and will all of those guys be starters? We'll see. But, I think if Kenyatta Jackson can be that dangerous edge rusher, I think that's only a good thing for the Buckeyes. And, if he's getting pressure on the quarterback, if he is, getting sacks, stuff like that, like that's going to help a defense that, like I said, is trying to replace 8 starters. Zion Grady's another guy that came up when talking about the defense and the defensive linemen. He's a guy, if you haven't been paying attention on Bucknuts, we asked our subscribers to vote for their top 20 players. Obviously early on in 2026, Zion Grady, a guy who played some last year and had a bigger role as the season went on. He was number 20 on our list, which I think speaks volumes for sort of the expectations for a young guy like that. That's a guy, there were a lot of fans that were hoping Ohio State would go out and get Chaz Coleman, the Penn State edge rusher from the transfer portal. I've talked to some people that have kind of pushed back at why we kind of have that guy already, right? A guy who's played a little bit, has flashed some potential. Obviously, Chaz Coleman played more, but Zion Grady's kind of the same type of guy. Do you need to go get another young defensive end when you have a guy you really like coming through? And hearing these guys talk is sort of reaffirming that. And I think it is always interesting to hear what the players think about other players coming through, because we've seen in the past guys that have been mentioned, that come to fruition the next year. And some of it is obvious, right? Like last year, Denzel Burke couldn't stop talking about how good he thought Julian Sayin was going to be. And I think we all thought that, right? But we're not there every day in practice. And Denzel Burke saying that, he's not a guy who sugarcoats things. So I think it was enlightening to hear him talk about Julian, and then he goes out and he's the most accurate quarterback in college football and is Heisman Trophy finalist. So there is something to these guys. Davis Igbinosun mentioned Jermaine Matthews, which I thought was interesting because obviously that's not a guy who is will surprise anyone, but I don't think Jermaine Matthews had the end of season that he expected. I think that the Indiana game obviously stands out with the 2 catches, one for the touchdown and then one on third down. But I think it just if you look at the full season, he had a good season, not a great season. That's why he's coming back for his senior year. But Davis Igbinosun talked about him. Devin Sanchez is another name that comes up quite a bit when talking about these defensive players. And he's a guy who got his feet wet, maybe even more than got his feet wet, but is going to need to be A, on the field more next year as probably the number 2 cornerback, and B, better. And I talked to, and it's a story that I'm still waiting to write, but I talked to Devin Sanchez at the Cotton Bowl, and he talked about, sort of learning trial by fire, so to speak, and becoming a better player because of the mistakes and some of the things that happened to him throughout the course of this season. And so I think that if he can take that step, which a lot of these guys expect him to do, again, I think it was Lorenzo Styles who said, you've seen him some, but he's just kind of getting going. If he can become that next outside corner that can be dominant for the Buckeyes, especially if those two, Jermaine Matthews and Devin Sanchez, become those guys, then I think it's going to be hard to throw on this Buckeye defense, especially when you talk about some of the guys they added in the secondary. Again, to promote our countdown, Trey Moore and Earl Little Jr. have already been announced as part of the countdown, so check that out in Bucknuts. And then, not as sexy of a position, but at tight end, both Bennett Christian and Nate Roberts were brought up as guys that have really bright futures. And I think everyone has heard about Nate Roberts from Ryan Day and others talking about the excitement for him. His role this year was more of a fullback than a tight end. But Bennett Christian is an interesting one because he has played and we've seen some of it. But next year might be your opportunity, right? You did bring in Mason Wilhelm, the transfer from OU. There are some other guys in that room, but like Bennett Christian's the old vet in that room, and he's I know fans don't like to hear about it. 12 and 13 personnel isn't going anywhere. Maybe they don't use it as much. Maybe they figure out how to use it better with Arthur Smith as offensive coordinator. But the tight ends are going to be a part of this offense. They've always been a part of this offense, even when you're still running more 11 personnel. So I think the ability of Bennett Christian to sort of take the next step, and it sounds like the tight ends think that he will be important for this offense, which is going to need to be better. I think I was talking with some people this week about the offense next year, just other reporters as we're hanging out, really about the team as a whole. And I think the consensus is like it's going to be very hard, as good as Matt Patricia and some of the talent is. Like it's going to be very hard for that defense to be as good because of how good it was a year ago. And so you're going to need this offense with Julian Sayin back as a second-year starter, and obviously Jeremiah Smith and Bo Jackson and 4 of the 5 offensive linemen back and all that. You're going to need this offense to get back to being a more high-scoring and efficient offense than it was a year ago, and even I think at times the year they won national championship in 2024. So I think the tight ends can be a big part of that. Now, does that mean Bennett Christian or Nate Roberts are going to catch a ton of passes? I don't know. You still have a good amount of receiving options out there that want the ball. But I think they do need to be involved and productive. And I think maybe that's where sometimes last year, whether it was how they used them or where they used them, I think that was almost more on the scheme and coaching than it was on the player themselves, because I think, you can see by Claire and Will Kazmarek both being invited here that there's a belief that those are guys who could make an impact in the NFL. And, with both those guys, and this is sort of another thing that's come up, you can add in Lorenzo Styles as well. CJ Donaldson, we haven't talked to him yet, but just the idea and sort of Davis and Ignosin, though he spent much longer at Ohio State, but the idea that, Ohio State prepares these guys for the NFL. And I sort of touched on it earlier, but, not just for the combine, but obviously with the way that these guys get drafted, I think the guys in the transfer portal recognize this, right? Not only do you have an opportunity to go and win a national championship, you look at a guy like, this offseason, like a Terry Moore, who's coming from Duke, or, even an Earl Little Jr. who's playing at Florida State, but obviously Florida State has been down. The opportunity to come to Ohio State, get a year with these coaches, get a year to kind of learn what this sort of juggernaut that has become an NFL factory is, and how you do all that. Look at Max Clare. We'll see where he gets taken, but that's a guy who, productive at Purdue, no doubt about it. But if he doesn't spend a year at Ohio State, is he as highly regarded as he is now? Similarly with, Will Kazmarek, he had an extra year, but certainly you're not getting looked at the same way as you did from Ohio University as you do at Ohio State. And that's not to say anything negative about the Bobcats or the MAC. Would never do that. But, you come to Ohio State, not only is the platform bigger for you to kind of make your case to NFL personnel, the coaching and the teams you're playing, right? You're playing against, say what you will about some of the teams in the Big Ten, like you're playing against other NFL guys. At the very least, you're doing it in practice every day, right? And that was another thing that Davis and Ignosin talked about, was the battles every day between those cornerbacks and wide receivers. And, this is nothing new. This has been going on at Ohio State for years. That iron sharpens iron mentality. And you can look across the board. It's not just cornerbacks and wide receivers, right? The defensive linemen, the offensive linemen, backers, running backs, whatever it may be. And to go back to the tight ends, I think it was Max Clare who said, he's out there trying to block guys like Kenyatta Jackson and Arvell Reese coming off the edge. And then he's trying to run routes against Davison Igbinosun and Caleb Downs. So, it's going to be hard, even in the NFL, to find, better guys than that. There are better guys, but just the you get that opportunity to go against some of the best every day. And that happens at other schools. I'm not saying, they're Georgia, Alabama, schools like that, but it's not everywhere, right? Not everywhere has NFL talent stacked on NFL talent like Ohio State has. And that's becoming harder to do with the transfer portal. We've talked about that. Guys are leaving, and so the depth is not going to be where it is, but you're still going to get that opportunity. And then you can bring in guys, like I said, Earl Little Jr. and Terry Moore, that, and that's just to name a couple, that are NFL caliber guys who, for one reason or another, are looking for a year or two or whatever it may be to come to Ohio State and sort of sharpen and refine and all that. So, I think it just continues this train of Ohio State guys being ready to go and experienced this level of college football. And you see how quickly some of these guys step into the NFL. Go back and look at this year's NFL draft. I'll pull it up here. And just how many of these guys actually contributed last year. I mean, obviously, the first round guys, Emeka Egbuka, Evan Jackson, Tyleik Williams, who's been asked about a lot. I assume it's a Lions reporter here who's been asking Ohio State guys about him. But it is funny. The thing that comes up every time is he's a bit of a clown, and they mean that he's funny. He keeps everything lively. So just an anecdote there. Josh Simmons started for the Chiefs. Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, JT Tuimoloau, when healthy, played a decent amount for the Colts. So many of them. Cody Simon was a starter by the end of the season for the Arizona Cardinals. Nathan Ransom played a decent amount for the Carolina Panthers. Jack Sawyer, a backup, but played a little bit, and that's a pretty, he's got pretty good defensive end ahead of him. Ty Hamilton, sort of a rotation guy for the Rams, didn't play a ton. Jordan Hancock worked his way into a bigger role as the season went on. Denzel Burke started multiple games for the Cardinals. Will Howard was hurt, didn't play, was the emergency quarterback a few times, but injury early, obviously also quarterback playing behind Aaron Rodgers. And then guys that didn't get drafted, Josh Fryer started some games for the Cardinals. Seth McLaughlin, injury, but a guy that the Bengals really like, right? So that's everybody that was taken in the draft last year that contributed nearly in some way. Will Howard being probably the lone example, and Ty Hamilton being the guy who didn't get in there a lot, the young Rams defensive line. So, I think it just goes to show to that point what the state guys can do, even if you're not a first round pick. There's a good chance that you're going to get in there and you're going to get your opportunity. And it doesn't always happen, right? We've certainly seen guys, picks from all over the draft, undrafted guys, whatever, that have gone and haven't done it. And you're not going to bat 1,000 all the time, but Ohio State's ability to have guys ready and the experience that they get and the ability that they have coming out of there is just, it's different. And there's only a few schools that can probably say they can rival that, like the Buckeyes can. And this time of year is always a reminder, and we'll get another one at the end of April. So, that's something that stood out to me, just how talented and ready these guys are for this, which I think is important. Not every school can do everything the state has to offer when it comes to looking at the NFL. I'm going to wrap it up. I know this was kind of a quick version. We just have a lot to do, but I want to make sure I got a Bucknuts Happy Hour out this week. So thank you guys for tuning in. Again, if you're watching this on YouTube, please turn on notifications, hit the bell, hit the thumbs up button. There will be plenty more hoping here soon. We haven't talked to anybody from Ohio State in a press conference or interview setting since New Year's Eve when the Buckeyes lost that game, which, frustrating, but there are reasons for it. At the very least, we should get them at the start of spring practice, which kicks off March 10th. So make sure you are ready to check out all those interviews. If you're listening to this on your podcast platform of choice, please make sure to give us a 5-star review, or give us 5 stars and leave your comments. And then if you're not, again, spring practice is about to start. There's going to be a lot of recruiting stuff coming up, visits. The summer brings the recruiting camps. So if you're not already, it's a good time to be a Bucknuts subscriber. Always a good time. But as we sort of build back towards 2026 and the recruiting heats up, it's an even better time. So if you want to hop on over, it's easy to subscribe, and I think we're a good community. Anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. Again, a quick one, but wanted to get one out, and we will get back on, probably some pre-spring practice here soon. There may not be a show next week. I'm having some minor surgery. I should be good to be able to sit and talk, but just in case, if not, we'll be back in a couple weeks when spring practice gets underway. Anyway, thanks again, guys. Cheers.